So hello, everyone. My name is Sally Aiken, and I'm Professor and Associate Dean, Research and Innovation in the Faculty of Forestry at UBC. I'd like to start off by acknowledging that UBC's Vancouver Point Grey campus is on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. I'd also like to recognize that I know many of you are in different parts of British Columbia or Canada or elsewhere in the world, and acknowledge the traditional owners and caretakers of those lands as well. So on behalf of the Faculty of Forestry, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to all of you who are joining us today. We're in very strange times, and it's really nice that we can come together and share this webinar and reach out across distance without being in person. And so we really appreciate that you've joined us, and I think we're in for a really exciting seminar today. So to get started on today's seminar, it's hard to remember a time when we couldn't experience the world through images taken from satellites or from planes. And those images have given us such tremendous perspective on our planet and on the and of the ecosystems on this planet. And now those images are absolutely everywhere on our smartphones, on the news. They've become so commonplace. It's much easier to generate those images than it ever was before. The technology's absolutely exploded, and there's vast amounts of data being collected. Now, to translate this big data into knowledge requires enormous computational power combined with innovation. We need innovative analyses to really extract the knowledge from all that data. And Dr. Nicholas Coops will be telling us today about new remote sensing technologies and how the potential of those technologies can be used to inform policy, management, and conservation decisions. So we're very fortunate to have Dr. Nicholas Coops with us today. He is a professor in the Forest Resources Management Department in the Faculty of Forestry, and he holds the Canada Research Chair in Remote Sensing. Nicholas leads an exceptionally large and productive research lab that has 25 postdoctoral, doctoral, and master's students. And the rest of us professors can't understand how he can manage a group that large. But he does with tremendous ability and attention. And so the main focus of his research is the application of Earth observation imagery to inform forest growth monitoring and forest change. So among many projects, Nicholas leads a large collaborative project called the Assessment of Wood Attributes from Remote Sensing. And this project has developed unique applications for LiDAR, which is light detection and ranging technology in Canadian forests. He's also used remote sensing technology to support grizzly bear recovery in British Columbia and Alberta as a member of the Grizzly Paw project. Now, Nicholas has won many awards, and I want to just mention two of those. In 2015, Nicholas won the Killam Teaching Prize, which is given to an outstanding teacher in the faculty. They're given out across campus, but every 2 years, one person in forestry gets that award. And I can tell you that I got to attend some of Nicholas's lectures as a result of that, and we are in for a treat today because he is a truly outstanding teacher, cares about his students a great deal, and communicates with such enthusiasm. But very recently, in April of this year, it was announced that Nicholas is receiving the Marcus Wallenberg Prize this coming fall in Sweden. And this is nicknamed the Nobel in Forestry. So this is a very big deal. And Nicholas has won, along with his two collaborators, this honor for his work in enhancing the most widely used model for predicting forest growth and carbon storage. And this was a model that was applied only to individual forest plots previously, but his work has expanded that to integrate with satellite technology to better understand the responses of forests to climate change. So that's enough for me. And if you could advance to the Slido slide, Nicholas. So Nicholas will start out with giving us a seminar, but we have considerable time for a question and answer period after that. And we will be using this Slido platform to get your questions and also for viewers to rate the questions that are submitted. So if you go to slido.com on your phone or on your computer, enter the code #UBC Forestry. You will be able to ask questions and you'll be able to see the questions from other participants. You can start doing that at any time during the seminar. Then when Nicholas finishes, I will ask him the top ranked questions in the deck. So with that, thank you very much, Nicholas, and we'll look forward to your presentation.
Great. Thank you very much, Sally, and welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. It's a great pleasure to talk about the work that we do here at UBC in the area of remote sensing. And I've called the talk the democratization of remote sensing, and I want that flavor to come through in the work that I do as I talk through the next 35 minutes with you. Before I start, I must acknowledge the considerable collaborations we have. None of this work is done in isolation. I've got incredibly strong collaborations with the Canadian Forest Service, the Government of Alberta, the Foothills Research Institute, and then researchers both here at UBC and globally. I will mention the students as I go, but I want to just highlight that all of this work is done through collaboration, and I value collaboration very much. So I want to thank the UBC alumni team for putting this together, and thanks Sally for that really generous introduction. So I'm going to talk about 6 fundamental ways I think remote sensing has changed in the last decade. And I think that that change has resulted in now being a golden age of sensing. And I want to make you think about that through this talk. And I want you to think at the end about how you can use some of these technologies in your work. You probably already do, but I want to really excite you about what is possible now. I had no idea 10 years ago the field would be what it is like today. And so I really want to excite you about these developments, make you feel proud if you're in Canada, because Canada's a world leader in many of these types of environments, many of these types of technologies, and really hope to make you reflect on how these technologies might be able to help you do business, might be able to help you in your research. And I'm going to do those 6 by talking about 4 large project areas that we work within my lab here at UBC. I would argue one of the first reasons I say that we are undergoing a democratization of remote sensing is that in the last 10 years, we've had a massive increase in free and open access to data. And this is not just any data. The data that we now have access to is global in scope and very high quality. So whereas previously we used to get single images from a single satellite and use that in one particular way, now we're getting archives of data that are very, very well calibrated from many different types of satellites. In fact, we have about 250 satellites that we could pick from every day that give us these images, and these images are of exceptionally high quality. Perhaps the poster child of really high quality data is actually our longest series of satellites called Landsat. Landsat was first launched in 1972. Currently, we're operating Landsat 8. There has never been a day that Landsat has not traveled over the Earth. So this is a remarkable record that we have access to with Landsat imagery. And the second thing that's happened with Landsat imagery is it's become free. So during the stimulus money that was used in the late 2008, 9, 10, the US Geological Survey committed to processing all of the Landsat imagery and making it freely available all around the world. And in fact, the first month that Landsat imagery became available for free from the Global Archive, more data was downloaded than had ever been bought from the Landsat program for the preceding 30 years. So we have access to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of images from Landsat for free since around 1972. And this is now, because it's free, because it's downloadable, because it's been calibrated to a very high standard, we're actually able to ask questions we've never been able to ask before. And we're in fact seeing a revolution around questions of land cover and land cover change. And this work is done in collaboration with Mike Walder, Joanne White, and Chumin Hermosilla, based at the Canadian Forest Service. And we're grateful, as you'll see in a minute, for the processing capacity that we get from Compute Canada. So when I was a boy and I used Landsat data, my professor bought me 2 images. They were $6,000 each, and I could compare 1 to 2 to work out change. Now, I can get every Landsat image ever recorded. So don't even think about an image anymore. Think about a pixel. Landsat Imagery has a 30-meter pixel. So think about that 30-meter pixel from 1984, when we get the Landsat TM record, through to today. Every 16 days, I get a different pixel that I can update. And so as a result, I no longer think about change as being simply before and after. Now I think about change as a process that's happening on the landscape, because I can observe the change every 16 days. Gone are the days of having a Landsat scene. Now you should think about the world as being 30-meter pixels that are changing every 16 days from 1984. So this work allows us to build exceptional quality images. This is Saskatchewan. And this is the process we go through to go away and look at land cover change at an annual basis. The image on the right is obviously Saskatchewan, but the pixels that I've used to make up that mosaic have in fact come from many, many images that were collected in the year 2000. Because if I just take one image, I'm going to have cloud, I'm going to have smoke, I'm going to have haze. But now I can say, do I really want this pixel or not? I'll wait the next 16 days and take the next one. So as a result, I can produce very high quality mosaics of anywhere in the world by merging these different images together and avoiding issues like cloud. I can avoid issues like shadow, cloud shadow. I could avoid issue like haze. I could avoid issue of smoke. I could also avoid data issues. So here you can see different errors that we get in one Landsat scene. But because I can now merge them together, every single image that I can collect through time, I can get this very detailed information about change. So here I'm looking at my pixel through time, through Saskatchewan. Here you can see through time on the X, my greenness index on the Y. You can see it's very stable, clearly not changing. But I can actually start to see noise very, very easily. So it becomes very easy to remove. But of course, I can see change. So I'm able to go away and document the change that's happening on the landscape. My annual images, I produce the best images I can by filling them in with different pixels, allowing me to go and make change. Now, I'm sure you all just gasped when you saw this. A collective gasp when you see this image. This is a 30-meter composite of Canada. It's 1 billion hectares of land. And so every single one here is a 30-meter pixel. This is 360 gigabytes of data, and it's taken 100,000 Landsat images to produce. So these mosaics are extraordinary, giving us an extraordinary view of how Canada is changing. And of course, at this scale, you're seeing a bit of phenology come in and out, but maybe it doesn't look like Canada's changing very much. But of course, when you then go and look at this through time, you can then say, okay, which pixels have experienced a change? And here we can see a colored map, which is telling us then where pixels have changed over time, the color telling us the year. And I'm sure you'll start to see patterns where you would understand the ecological driver. Look at the boreal, look at British Columbia, look at agriculture, look at the mixed wood. Zoom in. We can start to see the history of Canada's development in terms of the land parcels that we had in the east, where we have harvesting occurring on more family-owned lots in very rectangular type parcels. Here in Manitoba, in northern Manitoba, large boreal fires that burn. On the left is our Landsat annual composite. On the Y is us detecting the change. Alberta, we have here a complex mix of human disturbances. We have roads, we have oil wells and seismic lines. We have harvesting that are trying to emulate the natural fire pattern. And then we have fire. British Columbia, here we see mountain pine beetle coming in as a non-stand replacing disturbance, fairly muted over the landscape, followed by potentially fire or harvesting. So we're actually seeing incredible vignettes of how the landscape is changing over time, which allows us then to understand land change as it occurs in the landscape. And by using all of these images every single year, and by knowing that we have change, we have fire, we have harvest, we have non-stand replacing disturbance, we have roads, we have urban expansion, we can actually use those two pieces of information, the spectral data and the change information, to go and produce new maps of land cover. Now, I'm sure you're saying to me, sure, Nicholas, this is great, but can you give it to me? Yes, I can. Go to Open Data, National Forest Information Service, and if you go there, these layers are available for you to download. Now, not every single layer is there, but I encourage you to go to these and see what layers we've put up there. They're large files, but you can go to anywhere in Canada and start to download this data. So it's exciting times for Landsat. And the good news is Landsat 9 is built and will be launched in the future as well. So we don't see any delay coming in the Landsat program. It's here to stay in terms of our landscape level monitoring of the environment. A second key data set that's really exciting us in terms of remote sensing is LiDAR. LiDAR is light detection and ranging. We send a laser pulse from an aeroplane or a satellite, and we build up three-dimensional information of the forest surface itself. Canada is a world leader in LiDAR. Now, LiDAR is traditionally from an aeroplane. In fact, the vast majority of LiDAR we still have is from an aeroplane. But many provinces in Canada are recognizing the value. In fact, Ontario and Quebec are both committed to mapping the entire forested part of the province with LiDAR within the next 5 years. This is millions of dollars worth of LiDAR that's being collected. And we already have Alberta, which was the first province in Canada to collect all of the forested area of LiDAR. And of course, the eastern provinces as well are well covered. LiDAR is phenomenal because it gives us information about height. It also gives us information about the variation of the height structure that we see in the forest. And it also gives us information about cover. So LiDAR is very good at giving us this 3D view of how the forest is changing to give us information then around the structure of the forest itself. We can use this in many ways. With the government of Alberta, we've in fact gone away and tried to make a habitat classification of Alberta. So this is the forested area of Alberta. And here you can see this colored map is the height of the trees from LiDAR. This image here is the variation, the structure of the trees from LiDAR. And this one here is the cover, the horizontal cover. All of these are derived from LiDAR data itself. Now, if I have information about cover, height, variation, I could actually cluster those and make a cluster map that tells me what is the structure classes in Alberta. So this is a map that was produced by Aria Gao, who did her master's with us. It's a structural classification of LiDAR of Alberta's forests. So not land cover, but structure. The first time we're ever able to see this using remote sensing technology. And then you can go and say, okay, well, what species might be occurring in trees that have a dominant height of 10 to 20 meters? Or maybe they have a very homogeneous canopy, maybe a very variable canopy. What we're seeing here is the impact of harvesting, of fire. All of this produces this very dynamic habitat that Alberta is allowing us to go and map everywhere. We can then say, what do our national parks cover this variation? Do our protected areas cover this variation? What is the structures we're producing with our harvesting? So we can use these types of questions, ask these types of questions, because we've got wall-to-wall LiDAR over the entire forested area of the province. So it's exciting that we can start to do this. And we can do this now for parts of Ontario as we build up the coverage, parts of Quebec, and of course, other provinces as well. Perhaps one of the exciting things else LiDAR does is LiDAR gives us a very good terrain model. So that LiDAR point cloud is coming through the trees, but it's also hitting the ground. And that ground model that we get from LiDAR is also phenomenally accurate. With BC Timber Sales, the Canadian Forest Service, and Scott Hinch's lab at UBC, we're actually using LiDAR data to look at streams. This is a DEM, the terrain model from LiDAR. Using a computer, I can then work out where does the water flow on that DEM, which gives me a stream network. Piotr Tompowski, my postdoc, has then predicted what that stream network looks like compared to what the province says. So the orange is the provincial stream network. The blue is the network that I get from LiDAR. There are some clear differences in places. And that's because the provincial stream network is produced from interpretation of aerial photography. It's difficult to see the streams, especially the small ones. Whereas LiDAR is able to give me a phenomenal view of that hydrology. From my LiDAR streams, I can work out stream order. I can also, excitingly, work out the slope of the stream. And of course, in British Columbia, the slope of the stream is critical for fish habitat. So suddenly I'm able to get LiDAR, get a terrain model, predict the streams, work out the slope, build a map of fish quality. So we've got money from NSERC to BC Timber Sales to actually demonstrate this on Vancouver Island. And Scott Hinch is sending out his crew to go and measure the number of fish in the streams. We make the prediction from LiDAR to allow us then to go away and see, can we predict the stream habitat quality and even the fish abundance using LiDAR-based technology. Exciting times. And so as I get more and more LiDAR, as more and more provinces come in, as more and more LiDAR gets flowing, I can link that LiDAR with the Landsat, and I can then go away and think about structure everywhere. So I'm never going to get wall-to-wall LiDAR of all of Canada from an aeroplane. But I can take my little bits where I have it, link it to the Landsat, because Landsat's everywhere, allowing me to get large-scale predictions of some of these structures. And Mike's just had a very recent paper published in the last couple of weeks that really talks about this above-ground biomass that we have in Canada's forests and how that changes over time in response to disturbance and forest growth. So this is using Landsat to give us the wall-to-wall, LiDAR to help us understand the structure, to give us these really exciting maps over time about how our forests are changing. Sally mentioned the AWARE project, which is actually a fantastic project I've been involved in for the last 5 years. It was supported by 7 forestry companies, as well as 9 universities. And in that, we looked at LiDAR across all of Canada in terms of how it could be used. Perhaps one of the interesting things that we looked at was this issue of growth. Now, LiDAR's fantastic, but it gives you a snapshot once. Once the plane has landed, the data is old. Forests are dynamic, they change. So a company might invest $100,000 in LiDAR, but what does it do tomorrow? So this question of how do I link my LiDAR to growth is something we're still wrestling with, I think, broadly in Canada, in terms of the way we use LiDAR data. So my postdoc Piotr has been looking at this and trying to link LiDAR into a growth model. So here's a curve from perhaps a traditional growth model. LiDAR is giving us one point in time. Working with West Fraser, in Alberta, we've tried to link LiDAR with Gypsy, which is the growth model that they use. Gypsy needs some inputs. It needs information about age, top height, density, and basal area. And if you give that information to Gypsy, it will then go and give you a growth curve for that particular stand. Piotr has very cleverly taken that approach, but applied it to the LiDAR data. So on the top right-hand corner, from LiDAR, we get the maximum height, law is height, quadratic mean diameter, and volume. These all come from LiDAR. LiDAR can't give me everything. It can't give me the age. It can't give me the species. So I need to use that information still from the inventory. I need the inventory to tell me what the species of the polygon was. But if I know the species from the polygon and the age, which is interpreted from the VRI, I can then use the current conditions from LiDAR and have an optimization routine to find the best curve that relates those different variables together. I can then put every pixel from my LiDAR data set on that curve. Now again, I imagine there was a collective gasp across Canada, so I'll play it again. This is an area of forest in Alberta. The polygons are there from the AVI. This is a 20-meter cell that's been filled with LiDAR data, and the forest is growing over time. You can see the growth curve. That growth curve is for the central pixel. But the cool thing is that it's for every pixel in that area. And just to fill you in, it's height, basal area, volume, and number of stems. Of course, then, I can then optimize that to give me something like MAI, mean annual increment, and I can actually go and get an optimized MAI by pixel across the stand. So some of these AVI polygons are very homogeneous, as you'd expect. Other ones, you can see the LiDAR's providing very different information than what the AVI polygons would say. Okay, so I reckon we're becoming more democratized because we have free and open data, and we have lots of 3D data. I also think we're becoming more democratized because we can collect our own data. And this is how I want to focus on the Grizzly Bear project. This was supported by 11 oil and gas companies and the Foothills Research Institute in Hinton, with support from NSERC. It's focused on a grizzly bear in Alberta, which is listed as a threatened species. Grizzly bears in Alberta are very linked to the ground, so they don't eat and rely on salmon like the British Columbia grizzly bears do. They're more linked to the dynamics of the landscape because they eat berries and roots and forage in the beginning of the season after they come out of the den. So understanding how landscapes are changing in terms of the vegetation is very important for grizzly bear understanding. So how do we map the vegetation within a grizzly bear area? Well, one of the ways we get very fine detail is to use phenological cameras. Here's a camera here on the right. It's painted black to stop people from shooting at it, which is what they're inclined to do when they see a camera in Alberta. So it's in black, hidden, solar panel, protective box to keep it warm. It takes a picture every lunchtime, 5 images. Now, I'm not Cole Burton. I'm not looking for the bears. I'm looking at the land. So this is what it looks like. An image taken every single day for a year from this camera. What I can see is the landscape greening up and greening down. But if I zoom in, I actually can see different species, different parts of the landscape that have different species. And this camera was in fact placed to go away and see a particular species that has a purple flower. And that particular species is one that the bear eats early in the season. Now you might say to me, Nicholas, this looks fantastic, but it's crap. It's crap data. It's bouncing around. You got cloud, you got water, you got snow. How can you get anything out of that? Well, it's actually remarkably consistent if I process it in a particular way. I can take a large grid cell, and in that grid cell, I average all the pixels, and then I track the pixels through time. And my snow, yes, it's noisy, but once I start to see a green response through time, I actually get a very nice looking spectral response. The key then is how do I relate those cameras to space? We have about 15 cameras permanently installed in Alberta. And this is always the trouble. If you want remote sensing data every single day, you're restricted to a large pixel. If you want imagery, very fine detail, 3 meters, you might only get an image once a month. And that's related to this issue of the swath. So how can I get daily data of greenness at a fine scale? Well, I can try to merge different data sets together. This work is by Cam McClellan and Ethan Berman, who are both funded through the Grizzly Bear project. They merged satellite data every day, which is very coarse on the left, with fine scale Landsat data that we get every 16 days. They merged it together. to produce products like this. This is Alberta. This is every day. This is the greening up of the landscape. This is at 30-meter spatial resolution. So whereas I showed you the land cover maps at the beginning were annual, this is every day. And what you can see is the greening of the landscape through the year as we green up and then green down. We see those patterns with mountains in the left, which is why it's brown, through to the different landscape and patches we have across Alberta. So this was produced by Cam as part of his master's program. So he then went away and produced these incredibly large data sets, which are every single day, the greenness of the landscape. And then he relates that greenness to how much species I get of the particular food the bear might eat. Ethan did the same thing, but for snow. So we put cameras out that look at the snow. These are the snow sticks. We take a picture every day. We work out how much snow is there, how much cover is there. And he produced the same thing, a 30-meter daily snow product that can help us understand how grizzly bears might use the landscape. And a postdoc, Greg Rickbeal, has taken this to look at then when the bear emerges. So when the bear emerges from the den, what are the local snow conditions? Cam tells us the local vegetation conditions. And we can start to see how the bear uses those resources as soon as it comes out of the lab, the den, as soon as it comes out of the den. So you can see here, this is the type of data we use from the collar provided by FRI, hundreds of thousands of points in the landscape, and we then relate that to the remotely sensed data we get. So what's stopping you from collecting information from a camera to understand vegetation dynamics across the landscape? Nothing. These cameras cost $100. This idea of people and landscapes and how they're changing. This is sort of a really important part of the grizzly bear work. And part of the work has actually been focused on roads. Roads are hard for us to see from remote sensing because the pixel's quite big. But we are getting finer and finer scale imagery. We're playing with a satellite called RapidEye, a 5-meter pixel, and training that with an algorithm to go and find all the roads so we can understand how the roads are being used in Alberta for grizzly bear. Not just where the roads are, but what is the condition of the road? Here's a really cool app that we gave the forest managers. They put it on their phone and they put the phone on the seat. The phone records where it is using the GPS, but the phone, it then can work out the speed of how fast the driver's going. But if the road is bumpy, the phone bumps up and down and it records that. I get the roughness of the road. So we had our forestry partners and our oil and gas partners take these tablets, put the tablets in their car and produce all this information about the road network, not only where the roads were, but how they were actually, what the condition of those roads were. We get layers like this. So this is a road network predicted from imagery, from remote sensing. I then linked, well, this is Sean Carney's work, who was a postdoc for the Grizzly Bear Project, who's now back in the US. He then looked at, okay, well, how do people use the roads? This is where people do Facebook check-ins. So people have used Facebook and submitted a photograph. They're tourists, or they're looking around the general Hinton Rocky Mountain area. I also know where all the oil sites are. I also know where all the harvesting is. I can actually use a program called CircuitScape, which actually pumps a circuit through the road network. And I can say, if this is where the harvesting is, and this is where the mills are, how would the trucks most likely have got there? So I'm actually predicting here the use of the road by recreation, the use of the road by oil and gas, and the use of the road by forestry. So very interesting in terms of how we then relate that to grizzly bears. For example, we can change our management of the, we can change our use on the roads depending on when the grizzly bears are coming out of their den. We could say, for example, don't harvest these particular areas if we know that these bears are coming out of their den at a certain time. So we can change our road pattern usage to go away and ensure that we avoid those conflicts. In a very cool final part of this work, Tristan Goodbody has actually taken all of that social media data. He's taken pictures from Facebook, pictures from Google, as well as sites like Strava, which is what all the crazy mountain bike people use when they go for a crazy long ride and they're always looking at their watch all the time. They're putting their data up to Strava, which allows them to go away and boast to their friends about how quickly they rode to Jasper. So we can use that data because it's publicly accessible, lay it over our remote sensing imagery, and then predict where we think users are using the landscape who might use Strava, or who might use Wikilocs, which is another one of those sort of social media things. So this map is a prediction from remote sensing about where I think people who use Strava will be in the landscape. And ultimately, I can then link that again to bear movement. So Bethany Parsons, master's student, took layers like that in the background, and then here's the bear movement on top. And you can see that in low usage, the landscape is not being used by humans, so it's dark blue. Bears are more likely to be resting. Areas that are very bright, which are likely to be roads or verges or something like that that people are going to travel on, we're more inclined to see yellow. The bear uses that for travel. It moves along the road for moving around quickly, but doesn't stick any time there. Finishing up, another way I can get my own data is, of course, by drones. Drones have completely changed the landscape of remote sensing in the last 5 years. Remote sensing gives us, drones give us fundamentally different data than we've ever had before, because this imagery is such a fine spatial scale. Drones take images, and by taking many images with lots and lots of overlap, I can actually do digital photogrammetry on those images. I can actually completely saturate the area with photos from the drone, and that allows me to do digital photogrammetry to actually build a point cloud. So at the bottom here, you can see a drone-produced point cloud, not from LiDAR, but by taking thousands of photographs. It's different than LiDAR. LiDAR's the green, the photogrammetry from the drone is blue. We see the tops of the trees because that's what the photo sees. But we get extraordinary detail. This is what the drone sees on the top left. This is produced by Fiber, a UAV company and forest informatics company we work with in Vancouver. So they fly a lot of our data for us. This is the imagery that they see in the top left and what we simulate from the computer using this photogrammetry. Now this is fantastic because the pixels are so small, so it naturally lends itself to seeing very small things in the landscape. We are not going to be flying Canada with drones anytime soon. You still need to see the drone for it to be legally usable. So we're always going to be focused on small areas. But here you can see with the government of Alberta, we're actually testing to see whether drone data can be used for regen assessment. So here you can see different compartments that are coming back with regen. We've got different species mixes here. This is the imagery that we're getting from the drone. Incredible fine detail, but also incredible height detail. In fact, I can get the height of this to about 20 centimeters. So phenomenal detail, both in terms of what's coming back, but also the height, allowing me to sort of make these assessments then of how many regen trees are coming back, their height, which then might provide some information like, what's the density? Is the density coming back at the right level? Are the right species coming back? Are we seeing the right proportions of species? Another way we see this type of imagery being used is with fire assessment. Jeremy Arkin's doing his PhD with Laurie Daniels. This is drone data collected over the Williams Lake fires 2 years ago. Extraordinary levels of information we can now get that's not just pretty pictures, but it's analytical data we can process because everything here is digital. I can work out how big is the crown, how tall is the crown. And in the fire sense, I can actually work out how much was burnt, how much is left. So it's extraordinary data that I can produce. Now, I'm not going to get this all over Canada, but I can get this for high value, important areas. And Jeremy and Laurie are looking at how can we change models to take this data in better than simply just saying this stand was burnt, this stand was not. It is truly extraordinary information that we're getting from these drones. So if your kid wants to go and buy a drone, don't think it's a waste of money. They are remote sensing scientists at the beginning of their careers. Encourage them to fly and encourage them to process the data and see this incredible detail that we can pull out, allowing us to see individual crowns and the respective severity. This idea of using photographs to build up information about the forest can also be done from the ground. Chris Mulvihill defended his PhD on Tuesday using this technology, little cameras that we take in the field, 2 of them slightly moved apart on a pole. We lift the pole up and down. We take about 8 photographs of every single tree and recreate the structure of the tree using these photographs. Now, drones and cameras are very common. We are seeing drones and LiDAR, but they're very expensive. The drone might be 8K, but the LiDAR system is likely to be 60K. So you're putting a Porsche on an 8K drone. So this is problematic, but the data we get is extraordinary. Working with the Tree Improvement Branch at Ministry of Forest, Francois Dutoit and Samuel Gribbinger are using this data for breeding trials on in British Columbia, Doug fir forests. We're actually able to see from UAV LiDAR individual trees, individual tree structure. Extraordinary data. And Francois is in fact modeling every whirl to go and see how different breeding seed groups are outperforming each other. So rather than the Tree Improvement Branch going in, looking at these trials, measuring the DBH, kicking the soil and saying, oh yeah, this is a good one, we can now fly it with exceptional technology and understand why are these particular seed groups working better. And let me finish. Graduate students today come from an ethos and an expectation of free and open data. With that is becoming this expectation of free and open software. Now, 10 years ago, that was never the case. We spent thousands of dollars on licenses at UBC. But now there's an expectation that we write a lot of the software ourselves to make it free. And in LiDAR, the poster child of this is the LiDAR package, not written in UBC, written by J.R. Rasol, who's at Laval, but we've supported him in this project and Aware helped pay for it. But it is an example of an R package where he's taken all of the different routines available for processing LiDAR and actually written them in the R software, which makes it free and available to anyone. The Aware project has produced individual tree-based algorithms from LiDAR, algorithms that are free and available to anyone. Our work of the extrapolation of the LiDAR across Canada, the R project's free and reliable and open to anyone. So we've seen a change. Data is free, it is global, it is high quality. We're getting all different dimensions of data, not just imagery, but LiDAR data, gradually getting more and more across Canada. We can look at more detail more quickly. You can go and collect data yourself, go and get a camera, put it outside, take some images, download some data, get a drone, 800 bucks, buy it at Staples, fly your forest. Very easy to get your own data and ask these questions. And then how do I process it? Well, luckily, we're demanding free and open software these days. So I think collectively, all of that is a revolution. And I think we are seeing the democratization of remote sensing everywhere. And I'm proud that Canada is a world leader in that. Go to our Twitter, go to my email, send me questions, rewatch the video. I'll answer any questions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Nicholas. That was a fantastic presentation, and people have many questions. We're not going to be able to get to all of them, but since you talk quickly, we should be able to get to quite a few. So the top question is, how has progress in artificial intelligence influenced your work, and what are the possibilities you foresee for AI technology enabling and remote sensing in the future?
So great question. We're right at the beginning. advanced compute. We're right at the beginning. You know, advanced computing resources at UBC, at universities, in the industry. We're just starting to get into that. You know, these free packages that we can get, we're starting to get into that. Google producing these massive libraries that we can use, the programming structure, we're just starting to get into that. So I would say we're right on the edge of what we can do for that. And we're seeing some examples. And, you know, one is tree detection from either LiDAR or imagery. It's still tough to do. And people say species, we really want species, and that's very tough to do from space. Maybe there are hidden components, dimensions in this imagery that these, you know, big data solutions can try to go away and find. It is a challenge though. You know, foresters like to know what's going on. They're suspicious of black boxes. Biometricians are suspicious of black boxes. I'm suspicious of black boxes. So there's always that trade-off then. You don't want students using, or even an industry solution, using a black box solution that we're not really sure what's going on. It's also an issue for us in terms of graduate students. We don't teach big data and AI in an undergrad forestry degree, so we need to bring our computer science students in to help us do that. That's also a challenge. So I feel as though we're just starting that. I do think it will fundamentally change the way we process data, but you know, I think we're just starting to think about that. I will say though, we always need ground data to work out what's going on. I'm never going to replace the field forester. I might need fewer of them, and they might need to collect better data, but I certainly always need high quality forestry data to answer these questions.
Great. Excellent answer. And it's interesting the extent to which AI is on the edge of changing many of the fields of research in the Faculty of Forestry and elsewhere.
Yeah, exactly.
So the next question is, realistically, how far can you go with open source remote sensing software versus commercial software products, putting production scale capacities aside?
Oh, wait. If I was the owner of a proprietary, closed image processing software today, I'd sell my business. I don't believe that corporate-based software solutions are necessarily any better than an open source R-based, well, R slow, but an open source solution. I'm just not convinced that there's that much of a difference. Sure, today there might be a little bit of a difference. I'm not saying everyone should go and cancel their large licenses, but I really fundamentally believe that those companies will be running a completely different model in 10 years' time.
And that's a trend we're seeing across many research fields as well.
Yeah,
which
so,
is great.
Online, they might host the data for you. They might pre-process it to a certain level. They might be a provider of data to help you answer a question. They might have algorithms to help you process the data. But the sort of the idea that you sort of are encased in this closed software ecosystem that is proprietary and something like that, I just think those days are going really quickly.
Very interesting. Okay, here's a popular question about opportunities for training. So aside from university courses, are there institutions offering mentorship or internship opportunities for developing skills in remote sensing?
So, you know, many of the Institute of Forestry, the Canadian Institute of Forestry, you know, is one example through their e-lecture series that try to help that type of thing. You know, it is a gap to some extent. I think the Canadian Wood Fibre Centre is definitely, and even the provinces, they recognise the gap, and yet there is a gap. Remote sensing is still highly technical. A field forester is not going to know that level of information, or want to, or need to know that high level of information. And then you have college and university systems at the other end who produce these highly specialized students. So this gap in the middle, but it's really where consulting companies, it's where forestry companies have always fitted very well in the ecosystem. It's where they sort of fit today. You know, many of them have LiDAR systems or drone systems, and they collect data. So in terms of training, you know, through the education system, we have MyTax, which I think is a fantastic program. So If you do want to train someone, you're welcome to come to the university to try to do that through MyTax. But I do think there's, there's online opportunities, there's stuff online, there's courses through the CIF. So there perhaps aren't a lot, but I do think there's ways to do it. And I'd be happy to answer that question more if people have explicit requests.
Good. Thank you. Okay, the next question is, what are your techniques for engaging other stakeholders in understanding the technology behind remote sensing when making decisions?
Well, my approach is that I'm a Canadian public university professor, and anyone who asks me a question, I should answer. So I try to be as open and informative as I can, whereas a private company, whereas an individual, I try to do that. I think it's our job as professors to do that. So that's what I try to do. I encourage companies to come and talk to us or talk to our collaborators. I do think we've reached a point in Canada where there are a number of companies that are world leaders. JD Irving, West Fraser, Timberwet or Mosaic on the island. I mean, these are some world leading companies in their use of geomatics data. Quebec and Ontario now providing these close to provincial data sets are forcing companies to become more engaged. We work a lot with Ryan Lumber. We work with Corner Book Pulp and Paper. So, a better person to talk to some extent is one of these forest company people who love the technology. Speak to the tree improvement branch about the work. Speak to Scott Hinch about the fish work. The best person to advertise the use of remote sensing is not me, because I've drunk the Kool-Aid. But the key is find the person who's trying to use that data. So they're the people to speak to perhaps about what has worked, what hasn't worked, where they think the questions should be. I think many universities are open to collaborate. NSERC is still a very strong agency for collaboration. So I just encourage you to throw out your ideas to people and see what we can do.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question here, and I think this is a really interesting one. So how can remote sensing, and in particular LiDAR, be applied to soil mapping? And they go on to say, I know at this point, soil data obtained from LiDAR point clouds is pretty coarse.
Yes, so we are limited, none of these technologies see into the ground. So LiDAR is just giving you that three-dimensional representation of the surface itself. Now, some interesting work that has been done, of course, is the wet area mapping in Alberta that recognizes, like we do with streams, that if you pour water on the landscape, you see water movement. And if you know where the water's moving on the landscape, you can then look at the hydrology. Now, some actual work that was done in Aware, actually, with Shane Furs out of UNB, with Paul Arp as his supervisor, he actually used a lot of soil cores across New Brunswick and then related curvature of the landscape, the water of the landscape. He had the radiation exposure on the landscape and then built models of soil properties from the LiDAR. He also used vegetation that he could see from the LiDAR. More healthy forests, bigger forests might be on more fertile soils. And he actually made predictions of things like phosphorus, soil nitrogen, cations, clay content. So he was making those predictions across the landscape driven from the LiDAR DEM. Now, it's all correlative, of course, because he's not seeing those properties, but he actually was producing a 10 by 10 meter soil map that JD Irving were then using for their management in terms of where should be fertilized. So it is possible to derive those correlations, but we're not really seeing directly what the soil is telling us. So limited, but I still think, as I mentioned, the DEM, this terrain information is incredibly valuable for a whole variety of different uses. And I do think there's a lot of work that can be done with soil property estimation using that. Great.
Well, I want to give you the opportunity to provide any final thoughts you have, but I might just throw out that one of the guests on this webinar asked where you see remote sensing technology being in 10 years. So that might inspire you for a final word.
Well, I mean, the technology I haven't talked about, which people are talking about, is CubeSats. So I talked about this, I realize I've got a very short period of time. I talked about this this issue we have. Big pixels every day, small pixels once a month. But that's with one satellite. But if I launch 300, I sound like Elon Musk, if I launch 300 of those things, then I can see all the world every day at 3 meters. And that's what the planet constellation of satellites is. And that's also revolutionizing the way we look at the Earth. The issue of that data is it's like having 300 iPhones in space. So the images are not that high quality. It takes a lot of work to get those images to look really good. We're spoiled with the beauty of Landsat. But again, if we're looking at change, these might be other ways we can go and look at the Earth. So where do I see it going? You know, I do think we're getting to a point where in forestry we will have digital forest interfaces where we will see the forest every day, condition indices, condition metrics. We will have growth information, we'll have meteorological information, and like a dashboard of health of our forests. And I think remote sensing data will be feeding that every single day. Now, LiDAR won't be flowing every single day, but you'll have LiDAR as the beautiful underpinning. You'll have Landsat giving you some change. You'll have very fine scale drones flying over key areas. Once you've harvested, you'll throw the drone over there, get an image, check the regen every year, check for health. So I sort of see this data feeding into these information systems, enhanced inventory, but the idea of it being regularly updated. And it's this repetition in time, this excitement about getting data very, very often that I think is really what's going to be exciting in the next 5 years.
Well, that's something to look forward to, is just the expansion of this field and the additional information that we're going to get out of it over time, and how we can really use that information to better manage our forests and conserve the biodiversity within them. So I want to thank you, Nicholas, for a really thought-provoking seminar today. I want to thank all of the participants. We had over 200 people on this webinar, so it's really exciting to be able to share the cutting-edge work that's going on in the faculty with all of you, whether you are friends of the faculty, alumni, current students. I really appreciate you joining our presentation today. And during these difficult times, I hope that all of you will be safe, stay healthy, and get outside to enjoy the outdoors and hopefully enjoy our forests. So have a great rest of your day, and goodbye.
Thanks all. Much appreciated.